Okay, so this is another episode of the Uncivilized Art Podcast. I'm your host, Birmingham Hazan, but I go by Bandit Haze in the online space. And today, my guest is Andrew Sennedra. Now, I've known you for a little while. Musician, comic book fan, wrestling fan, all kinds of cool stuff. But you know what? Let me shut up for a second, Mr. Andrew Sennedra. Tell the people who you is.
Oh, well, you named a lot of the stuff. Musician is definitely one thing I love talking about. Not just metal, but music. I definitely can understand a lot of the different nuances and details in music. That's definitely my passion. I think where is at. I'm definitely into comics because I want to try to write my own. It doesn't necessarily just be a comic, but graphic novel as well is something I really want to do that I'm working on. I have a massive, massive concept in my mind that I'm working on right now, so that might take a long time. Yeah, wrestling I'm into mostly more of the underground, like indie stuff for the most part, or at least smaller companies, along those lines. Not really WWE. Um, but that's just a little hint of a lot of the stuff that I'm into. I'm all over the place.
With that, real quick, actually, because I spoke to Invincible. He's a Twitch streamer. Guess a little while back, maybe some months back now, and he's a wrestling fan, and he's kind of gone from watching a lot of WWE to watching mostly AEW. Do you find that's a common thing in the wrestling world with a lot of wrestling fans moving from WWE to AEW or other promotions?
I think it's happening more because I think people are sort of getting away from WWE. Like I hadn't really paid attention to it since I was in my teens. I stopped around 17 or 18 because I just didn't really care for the wrestlers anymore. I wasn't really interested. The only time I really saw WWE was like when I was working nights and it was on in the middle of the night and there was nothing on and I was flipping through while I was eating something. and but uh, yeah, for the most part, I just think people maybe are getting a little tired of the same sort of product over and over and over again, which has been the last 20 years. They haven't really evolved into much else. I don't like the big production of it. I've seen ads for it. I'm like, this just looks too dramatic, too huge all the time. It sort of takes away from the actual wrestling itself. So I'm not really. I don't know too many wrestling fans, so I can't say if they've like changed gears or not. But personally, like I just want to see something that's more interesting, more dynamic wrestlers and characters and stuff. Not the same guys just coming out in underwear with a new name.
It can be like that. I mean, for myself, I haven't watched wrestling, just any kind of wrestling, for a long time now. I do try to keep up to some degree with WWE. I follow a lot of wrestlers on, like, Twitter and Insta, and so I see what they post from time to time, and things like that.
Yeah,
So I know, like, Triple H is more in charge now, and
yeah.
apparently, at least according to some of the Twitter posts I'm seeing, that he's made some pretty big, interesting changes. But I haven't actually watched it myself to know what I think of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, is that something that can make you possibly go back to things like WWE, like someone like Triple H being more in charge, or you just done with it
Um,
now?
for me, uh, I just also didn't like the greasiness of the company. The Vince
Okay.
McMahon being such like a two-faced individual, so I sort of just wasn't never really interested in giving my time into um, and individuals like that. I sort of have a weird set of I don't know morals where I don't go back to something because I don't want to give my time to it anymore because I sort of feel I don't know like used. Like I'll never watch NFL football anymore just because I feel like the way it's grown into seems uh, not like abusive, but like they abuse their power.
Mm.
You know, like they use people a lot. A lot of companies are going to do that, whether it's just like NFL or WWE or whatever. But like, I just don't want to waste my time on a product like that. I just feel like it's a bit of a waste to do
Mm.
that with those types of companies anymore. Turn it off by it.
Yeah, and I think of what you mean. It's like certain. I mean, I guess when a company gets really big, it's hard for them to stay a good company. You know, there's always gonna be things that go behind the doors that most people don't even hear about, or most people don't even care about. But when you do know about them, it's kind of like, do you really want to support some of the trustees that goes on behind the doors? And that's always going to be a difficult question, I think, for depending on what it is and what the company is and how much it is means to you and such and such. But
Yeah,
yeah, I guess you kind of get to a point where like there's other alternatives that aren't doing that, so
it
I could go
it
there.
was similar for me. Like when Barry Bonds, he was never caught using steroids, but you knew he was on something. And I was just not going to support an individual that you knew was cheating. I just thought like some of these people, once they cross these lines, I'm like, I'm not really interested in supporting these individuals that like maybe have commit crimes, assaulted women,
Mm.
these types of things. I'm not going to be one of those individuals that supports these types of individuals. Like Motley Crue, they're assholes. Like, I'm
Mm.
not really interested in supporting a band that's abusive of individuals and things like that. So, whether you like their music still, it's like you don't have to support them though. Like,
Okay.
um,
That's I think an interesting area then, because like I guess that kind of touches on things like cancel culture a little bit. Where I mean cancel culture, because I feel like there's a difference between what's commonly called cancel culture and an individual decided for themselves, they don't really want to support certain things.
yeah,
But it is kind of in a similar area where, band X does something or says something that somebody finds abhorrent. And because of that, or because of maybe that and some other things, they're like, you know what, I don't feel like I could, in good faith or in good consciousness, support this band. I feel like that's fine for any individual to decide these things themselves.
yeah,
But when it becomes into this kind of cancel culture where people kind of going on Twitter and campaigning, and I feel
yeah,
like there's a blurry line in there somewhere between, yes, you have the right to express your frustrations and your disappointments and your feelings about certain things. Yes, you have the right to not support an artist or whatever. But at what point does that become bullying in and of itself? You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. The people trying to force others to uh, cancel somebody because of like something they've said or things like that. Like, um, for me, like for instance, there's some bands that have had members that have committed rape and have had child porn and things like that
Mm,
where like
oh,
I'm not really interested in supporting that band anymore if they support that individual. If they're like, okay, we're getting rid of this guy. But I've seen some bands that are like that where they keep individuals along, and I feel like that's where lines are crossed. Like, for instance, the January 6th assault on the Capitol building
right.
in the U.S. John Schaefer, who's the lead man for Iced Earth, was in the building, and he's all pro-Trump and let's overthrow the government and this type of thing. And I was like, I had several albums of that individual. I followed Iced Earth for many years, and then I just thought, I don't want to support this individual even just by having their music anymore. I just thought,
Mm,
like there was ways that you could have protested without fucking like going into this building and assaulting all these individuals. Individuals ended up dead. So I just thought like I don't want to support this individual anymore in any way because I just think like this was a weak way of doing what you wanted to get across. you're a musician. You could have got your point across many ways,
Mm.
and you had a platform to do it. Instead, he goes and is right there on the ground floor. I'm just like, I just thought it was weak, and I'm like, I'm not supporting this individual. Goodbye, CDs.
Do you? Would you? I mean, do you get rid of your CDs, or what happens there? Or
Oh yeah, I sold them. I was able to sell them, so it's like
okay,
we have some used shops here in where I am at least, and I was able to sell them and get some a little bit of money for them, not much, but I was just like, I'll get rid of that stuff. Hopefully, it doesn't happen to one of my bigger bands that I'm really into, but I feel like a lot of the bands that I'm really into, they know that it's not their music isn't they're not trying to be political and things like that.
mm,
Like I don't have a lot of bands that have political or huge anti-religious views and things like that. A lot of stuff is just it's more personal, it's more fun metal. It's nothing outlandish like I have to make a political statement and fuck this and then that guy and that, and you're like okay. So
yeah, yes. I feel it's an interesting time for celebrities when it comes to that sort of thing, though, because like back in, I mean, 80s, 90s, as I remember at least anyway, and granted I was a child, so maybe I'm misremembering a lot of things. But as I remember it back then, it was very common for celebrities of all kinds to not give political views very often. Like the only times you ever saw it is if they were specifically trying to, campaign against a thing, and when they did that, I guess they knew that their acting career would be pretty much like you only really see them do it towards maybe the end of their acting career or the end of their that sort of thing. But
yeah.
when they're at the height of their fame, it was rare if ever you saw anybody give any kind of strong political opinion on something.
Yeah,
And it seems like more and more these days, fans want that from celebrities. They want to know, who they voted for. They want to know what they think about abortion rights. They want to know what they think about, such and such going on in Syria or other parts of the world. They want to know these things.
yeah,
And I think one of the problems is that when a band does say their opinions and it turns out the band's opinion is not in line with the fans' opinion, and then you have this whole thing. So it's kind of an interesting point because as a celebrity, I guess the best advice would be to keep if you're trying to say sell your music to as many people as possible, then the best advice is to keep your political and maybe your religious views to yourself. But maybe if you don't care about that, it's a different whole thing. But then it's kind of like wanting to do that versus people wanting to hear what you have to say and then not liking what you have to say, and I guess you can't really win either
yeah,
way.
exactly. Yeah, for me, I personally never want to really hear their views on things
Mm,
because it might go against what mine is, like or personal life things, um, like or personal opinions on whether it's like abortion or um, gun violence or whatever it is. I'm like, just do what you do. But like you could probably write music, and I think a lot of bands do this. Is they write music about like things they believe in, but they use like a metaphorical
mm,
sort of standpoint or a
yeah.
story standpoint. So it's like this is just a story. Take it how you want. Like it's not really like my personal belief or this or that, or you don't know. So like they can lay it all out there in a better way for you to make your decision and come up with. But that's what a lot of them do is like the message is in there. You can come up with how you want to interpret it and things like that. They don't like want to necessarily enforce or force their opinions and things on the listeners and stuff. And they put it all out there musically, lyrically, and then the listener decides how they want to take that. And so they try not to offend their fans and stuff like
Mm,
that. So I think they do it in a smart way for the most part. and then but then there's other ones who like literally are saying like screw this guy and screw that guy and these are my beliefs, and you're like now you're just kind of forcing it and forcing your word upon people and being like, oh, if your fans are against this, like screw you too.
Mm.
And you're kind of like, you wouldn't have the millions that you do if it wasn't for the fans. So
Yeah, and I've seen a few people take that hardline approach. It's I mean, I guess to be fair, it's like you have that right to be like, hey, I'm gonna say this, and if you don't like it, screw you. You have that right, but you also have to. I think if you're gonna take that kind of approach, you just have to accept the fact that, or the potential fact that people might just say, okay, fine, I'll leave it alone, and then that could affect your sales, that could affect your merchandise, that could affect who books you for a tour, that could affect all these different things. And if
yeah,
you are 100% okay with that, cool. But it does seem sometimes that people want to be able to say whatever, but when some of these consequences come in, that's when you might see a few people backtrack
yeah.
and maybe start issuing apologies and I didn't mean it that way, that sort of thing. Like, bruh, come on.
Oh, that's exactly what happened to John Schaefer of Ice Thirst. Is what happened to him? He got dropped from his label. A bunch of bands distanced themselves. He had two bands, and the members were like, "We're not working with this individual anymore." All his merch was dropped on like European sites. Like all these different things that happened to him because of what he did, and it's like sitting there going like this is the consequences of your actions and you can't backtrack now, like, so maybe it would have been better just to maybe write an album with a plot line that's similar to this
Mm,
to sort of get people to see it from your point of view and then see it from another point of view, because like he's written political albums before, um, and to try to sort of put his point of view on things about the history of the U.S. And I think that was fine with people. Take it how you want it, but like once you do something like this, there's no going back.
mm. Yeah, no, for sure. But there's like I think with artists and getting your messages across, there is this at least this is what I feel as when I've done some writing. It's like you can go the metaphorical routes as you talked about earlier, and I feel that's awesome because like you can put something out. I know what I meant by it, but when you hear it, you might have a completely different take on it. And when someone else hears it, they've got a completely different take on it, and another person has
Yeah,
got, and millions of people can hear it and have a million different takes on what that means. So it can mean something different to however many people, right? The problem with going that route though is that what I meant to say and the thing that I was trying to say might not come across. So though I say what I want to say, I'm not necessarily saying what I want to say. But then the other route is you go more direct and you don't use the metaphors and you say specifically this is what my message is, and you can get your message out there. But now maybe it doesn't relate to as many people. Maybe not so many people care about it. Maybe it doesn't mean as much, or maybe the only people who care about it are the people who already think along those lines, and then you're not really reaching anybody else.
yeah,
So it's there's always like these different kinds of balances I think you make as an artist. Maybe many do subconsciously between trying to get things out to as many people as possible, trying to stay as true to yourself as you can, and trying to figure out how you do that without losing integrity or.
yeah, exactly. I think the best way to do it is sort of the way Megadeth has done it. They take wars and things, and they don't necessarily focus on a specific war or a specific, individual that led that war or something like that, or a certain act that is going on in the world, and they just sort of write about it. But it's not really like Dave Mustaine's opinion or against it. It's just this is something I've seen, and that's happened or happening, and we're writing about it. It's not
Mm,
really like we're against it or with it or something. and that's for the listener to decide, right? Like, architecture of aggression is a good example of like it's just talking about big business taking like and banks. So, or that banks is more foreclosure of a dream, but architecture of like those two songs are great examples of companies and banks and things taking control of like the people's money, sort
Mm,
of control of land in the U.S. and just taking away things from our normal rights of like what we used to have. Like you could just have a farm, and but now it's like there's all these rules behind everything like that. If you were to pass your farm on, for instance, here, you have to pay like ridiculous amounts of taxes to your son when you pass away. Like it's insane all the different things that are being taken from us. So he just writes sort of about the situation, and then the rest is up to you when you
mm.
think like, oh, this is greedy or it's not greedy, and things like that.
So for yourself then as a musician, like how do you feel you approach to music? Like, are you more trying to be metaphorical? Or are you more trying to be direct? Or are you more, or maybe like the Megadeth approach? Like, what do you feel like your kind of approach to creating music is?
I like metaphorical. I like to just come up with a theme and write about it and use different words to sort of portray what I'm trying to get across, and then just have people take it as it is. Like um, it's hard to explain exactly, but like I can. Some people might think stuff's about suicide or something because the way I've written it, but it was really like just about me walking down the side of a river at night,
Mm,
and I turned it into an entire song. I just turned the song into that like moment that I felt, and then I turned it into a song, and people will be like, "But this sounds like grim and dark, like you're going to commit suicide and things." And I was like, "Yeah, it was really just about like seeing the moonlight reflecting off the river."
mm,
And I just sort of come up with things like that for most of the songs that I've written, at least. For the most part, my brother's written most of our songs, so uh, I guess the concepts have been mine. I also do like to take away from like creepy historical stuff too, that are like really, really rare, like a really rare thing that happened in history, like a haunted story and things like that. And then I like to sort of try to make a spin on that as well and come up with. I don't really know if I use metaphorical terms for it, but I just come up with like a sort of creepy tale as well for some
mm.
songs.
Yeah, you know what I like about that though is like, you talked about the song where when you wrote it, you were just talking about it's the moon and the river, and then somebody else heard it and thought this is about suicide, and I feel like what I think is good about that is how it shows so many things are connected to each other
Yeah.
that in ways that we don't necessarily realize. So you're writing about this moon reflection off the river, and this person's hearing it thinking this song's about suicide. So perhaps there's something in that translates to a feeling that people go through when maybe depressed or feeling suicidal. And that might have been a way to you when you were writing it, but it's still connected to this, through some way that we don't always fully grasp.
Well, yeah, I definitely understand like where it would have come across because you're thinking a person lonely in the middle of the night, the moon's out, they're just sitting there thinking about themselves, and there's deep water there. So it's sort of
Mm,
those elements that you all translate loneliness, darkness, deep in thought, and then you add the river as like the tool. You take those elements and they're like, oh, it's about somebody who's alone and they decided to end it, that lonely
mm,
night. So you add certain elements, and I think that sort of lays out a visual for people, and that's sort of what I try to do when I'm writing stuff, even like writing my graphic novel stuff. I literally, when it comes to designing the panels for the art, I close my eyes and I visualize what I want it to look like. Then I describe everything in it. If there's something important that I want it at night, I want it in this setting. So I'll close my eyes and then since I can type with my eyes closed, it just can describe everything out that way and set the scene for that panel. So I'll know, okay, this is how I want the art to look or what I want in that art to look and how individuals look.
So speaking of graphic novels and comics, um, so I mean, there's a lot of big comic book movies coming out, Marvel, DC, and they've been coming out for a long time. Personally, I'm a big fan of it. I'm very heavily invested into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I'm looking forward to a lot of the new movies that's still to come.
Yeah.
That being said, I do accept that there are a lot of these movies, which I think could be both a good thing and a bad thing for very many reasons. But for yourself as comic book fan, comic book writer, and I think if you are more into the smaller comics, is that right?
Well, I grew up with Marvel and I like a lot of Marvel. I just don't really collect it anymore. If I'm gonna get anything, it's more from like the 70s, 80s, early
Okay.
90s maybe. So not really into the more modern stuff.
Do you feel like a lot of these sort of the big movies that are coming out? Do you feel that that is more positive than negative to comic books, or do you feel like that's more negative than positive for comic books? Like, how do you feel the effect of these big movies are on the comic
I
books
don't,
themselves?
I don't know if I would say negative. I think if somebody said like negative, I'd be like, well, that's kind of weird that you'd think that it's negative. But like, because I feel like it might be, yeah, it might be drawing a lot of casual fans to comics, but it might be drawing a lot of people who didn't really know the genre and know what it was or where to start. And you find people all of a sudden that come in and become diehard comic individuals and want to go back and find older issues and learn more about the original story of, let's say, Spider-Man, Hulk, Iron Man. Learn more about the history of comics and get into all kinds of other ones and find a world they never knew existed because of the movies. It's a gateway, right? It's an entrance into this genre they had no idea that existed. They might have thought it was cheesy in the beginning, and then they see all the rest of it and come across like I found a publisher called Valiant because I started digging into um, the lesser known publishers and things like that, and that's literally because of Marvel. Like I started with Marvel as a kid, and I started reading it again in my 30s, and it trickled down into finding more and more. I wanted to find stuff that was more adult, more intense, interesting, resonate with me. And it's sort of just I kept searching, and I found other comics and publishers, and now it leads to me purchasing their stuff, all because of something that's bigger. So I don't really necessarily see the movies as a negative.
Okay, okay. Now I like that approach. I mean, for me, I used to. Well, most of my comic book reading was probably around about mid to late '90s, I reckon, ish, around about that sort of time. Um, these days, I probably don't read anything as much as I really should be. Um, but yeah, the movies they do provide a kind of convenience.
Yeah,
You could watch a 2 hour movie far easier than you can read. 5, 6, 7. Well, I don't know about you, but for me at least anyway, but he's like you read like that many comics.
yeah,
I do try to get some comics from time to time, but I think the last comic set I got was probably about 5, 6, 7 years ago at this point now, and it was the Civil War, one of the Civil War sections. I think Civil War's like a massive section. I think it's just like a small
yeah,
part of the whole thing. So yeah, I guess I mean big part of the reason I got it was because of the Marvel movies and going back to the comics as well. So I guess that happened myself.
yeah.
But for me, I feel like yeah, I'm definitely more the movie comic book guy. and I was just there thinking, like, because yesterday actually, in fact, I guess we're going to talk a little bit about horror as well, actually. So, let me, this might be a nice gateway, nice segue to that. Because yesterday I watched Hellraiser at the cinema. It's being shown at at one of the independent cinemas in London, and one of the thoughts that kind of came to my mind is that independent cinemas are just in this unique position right now because like a
Yeah,
lot of the movies coming out are these big Hollywood movies, because the ones that make a lot of money, and a lot of that is a comic book movies,
yeah,
which dominates a lot of the mainstream cinema. And again, I'm a big fan of that, right? But it does mean that a lot of other movies either don't get made or maybe they don't get as promoted as much. And you may be moving into a era where you're just getting the big movies that sell a lot and very few of the smaller movies, unless you're going to places like independent cinemas, like the one I went to yesterday, where they specialize in older films and
yeah,
independent films and foreign language films, and they kind of in that unique position where they independent cinema could become much bigger than it has been, whereas mainstream cinema, I don't think it becomes smaller, but it could become very monotoned in the sense that you're just seeing the same sorts of movies because they're the big ones that draw the big
exactly.
crowds and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's probably the case. That's, but yeah, so that does sort of, at least open up, like what you said, it opens up an opportunity for smaller cinemas or whatever, or little like ones that you went to see Hellraiser at,
Yeah.
like an opportunity to show stuff like those movies. I think that's sort of a positive as well. It opens up an opportunity for other businesses like that to pop up and things. Like we have drive-in theaters all over the place that show those types of movies and things like that here. So I think that's, if they want to show the big blockbuster movies, well, this opens up an opportunity for people to go see, like your Hellraiser or something like that. I'm really surprised they showed a Hellraiser. Was it the original number one?
The original, yeah, 1987 Hellraiser. And it's kind of crazy because like it was a £14 ticket, right? And I mean I don't know what Hellraiser costs to buy now, but I'm sure you can buy it for way less than £14, right? But how many opportunities are you going to get to watch a 1987 movie at the cinema in the way that it was meant to be shown?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's the draw of a lot of these places, that you can see older films in a way that they're supposed to be shown, that you're not going to get very many opportunities to these days.
Yeah, exactly. And it's more about the experience for
Mm,
theaters. I don't think people understand, that sort of aspect of it, and that sort of is something I've always felt about, like, why people don't buy comics or buy vinyls or something. They just have all their music online and things. I'm like, it's more about the experience of having it.
mm,
And if you can just carry your music around, you don't really experience it. It's just like on your ears and you're walking around or something like that. Whereas like, maybe a good reason why I can soak it up better than other people is because I actually sit here and listen to it,
mm.
so I can hear like every nuance of the music, and that's why other people miss it because they're busy doing things. They have it on at work and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
So
that's
maybe
it.
that's
That's me right now for sure.
like maybe that's why I can pick up like just so many little things in the music that others don't, and why I can translate it. I'm sure that also is part of like my musician background and years of just listening to music and how I absorb it.
Mm.
So sort of like similar to like a serial killer, I have the abilities to feel energy and be not. I wouldn't say compelled to kill people. I just mean I feel
Well, hopefully
energy
not, right?
from from things. So I definitely can feel stuff from music and people and a whole bunch of different things in the world that maybe others can't. I don't know what I'm in tune with, but it's definitely different.
Well, speaking of serial killers, actually, let me come back to this. Let me come back to that one because I was going to talk about horror for a second. So, because
Okay.
you mentioned about Halloween 3, Season of the
Oh yeah,
Witch. And for those who might not know, Halloween 3 Season of Witch does not feature Michael Myers. And I watched it again recently, I think about a few weeks ago. And I would say it's better than I remember when I watched it the first time. It's still not what I'd call a good movie, after watching it again. But it definitely has some cool moments and some cool ideas. But you mentioned that there was a reason why Michael Myers wasn't in it. So
yeah.
what's that
Well,
reason, pray
it's
tell?
um, Halloween was supposed to be a one-off by John Carpenter. It was just it was like that was going to be a one-off story, and it wasn't supposed to continue with Michael Myers. It was literally just supposed to be about the boogeyman. Why he was going after Jamie Lee Curtis or Laurie Strode. People were like, "Oh, it was his sister. That's what they did for the second movie." But actually, he was just randomly doing that. But John Carpenter gave the rights for them to continue the story. So he couldn't use Michael Myers again, but he owned the rights to the theme, like to Halloween itself. So when he came out with like Halloween 3, it was that was like John Carpenter's story, Season of the Witch. So it was a totally different story. Like that's why I didn't have Michael Myers in it, is because that was a John Carpenter, and the
Okay, so
Halloween 2
uh, uh,
was a,
oh, sorry.
oh yeah, the Halloween 2 was a continuation, and then Halloween 3 was like John Carpenter wanting to do his own thing again under the name Halloween, and that was his own story. And then uh, I think he just decided to stop because it was going to be confusing for people, and then they just continued the Michael Myers story.
Okay, okay. So yeah, I'm just looking at now. Right. So yeah, John Carpenter. Well, he's uncredited apparently, but yeah, he's listed as one of the writers. Okay, um, that's interesting. So he sold the rights to Halloween.
We
Well, sold
sold,
rights to
I
Michael
think,
Myers, I guess, and that
yeah,
that whole story.
yeah,
But then he's like, I want to make my own movie.
yeah.
I don't want and put it out under the Halloween name, but because you know
Well,
what?
I
I guess
think,
to be fair, yeah, back then the way film studios were, like, yeah, I remember like things like you'd have like all these different studios, but like one studio might own one movie, and that's another studio might own like part two of that movie, and like there was like, right now things are a bit cleaner. I think like a lot of big companies
yeah,
have bought them all up anyway. But back then, yeah, I think it was a very messy about who owned what, So
yeah. But that's
okay, that yeah,
I think his original idea was Halloween was supposed to be like a Tales of the Crypt. Each Halloween was going to have a different theme to it, a different story and stuff like that. So I think like if he was to do the first one was going to have Michael Myers, another one was supposed to be Season of the Witch, another one was going to be this story, another one was and so on, right?
mm,
Like I think that was his idea. I just think he couldn't continue to do that because it would have been so bizarre having like Halloweens that had zero Michael Myers theme and then Halloweens that had the Michael Myers theme to it. So you're like, it just would have been a complete disaster and messy, and people
yeah,
would have been confused and maybe turned off. So I think he just was like, I can't continue to do Halloween movies without Michael Myers. So he just gave up on that idea.
yeah. They just let, I guess just let them do it. They've made. I mean, how many Halloween movies are at this point? Like 100, I think. It's just they just kept making them, then rebooting them a couple of times, and I think they reset the story, reset the timeline at least two or three times, and I haven't
Yeah.
kept up with. I think the last maybe three or four Halloween movies I don't think I've seen, but I've seen most. I think. I feel like I've seen all of them up until Halloween H2O, and then after that, yeah, I think that's when I haven't kept up.
The latest Halloween trilogy is connected to Halloween one. It's a continuation from Halloween one.
Yeah.
They call them like different storylines. Like one's the Jamie Lee Curtis storyline, One's the Dr. Loomis storyline, Donald Pleasance. So they have like the different timelines that go off because number two was never supposed to be that. That was just created. So
Mm.
this is these next three that are most recently made are connected to Halloween one, and I think John Carpenter has been a part of these ones as
Yeah,
well. I don't
I,
think he wrote them, but I think he's been involved.
I did see one interview um, years ago where one of the producers of Halloween was saying something along the lines. I think he was talking about Donald Pleasance, and apparently Donald Pleasance wanted to make at least 20 Halloween movies, but Donald Pleasance had died already by then, and he just said that they'll just keep going till they get to 20. They'll make at least 20. So, well, I'm not sure how many he made, but I'm pretty sure if it made 20 movies, I think it must be at least close to it.
Well, in total, I don't know. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. In total, eight, 13, I think in total,
But, okay, they're close. They're close.
if you include the Rob Zombie ones,
They're getting there.
which I think is random. But I don't
Well,
like the Rob Zombie ones. But
speaking of psychopathic killers, so you mentioned that you had some was it controversial views on serial killers or serial killer documentaries, nature versus nurture.
yeah,
I mean, my view on documentaries and shows like they had the recent one about Jeffrey Dahmer and that caused
yeah,
some discussion, and I could totally understand how anybody who's related to any of the victims just seeing that is going to trigger something, and I don't think that should be respected. Apparently Netflix did not contact the families involved at all, whether to ask permission or whether just to let them know that they're doing it. And personally, I feel like that's kind of a lame move. They should have at least let them know.
yeah,
That being said, one of the things that came out of that conversation, that I saw at least anyway, was that people only watch these types of shows because they get off on other people's trauma. And although I feel like, yeah, people like that do exist,
yeah,
to my mind at least anyway, that's not why people watch it. I feel like these shows can and often do expose uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about our society, about the way we treat people, about not the serial killers and that whole thing, and what how they lead up to becoming a serial killer, whether that's being bullied or mistreated or things like that. It can expose uncomfortable truths about the way we handle the victims, and like in the case of Jeffrey Dahmer, people not being believed when they were calling the police multiple times.
yeah,
It can expose a lot of uncomfortable truths about ourselves, our society, and how we continually mess up on certain things. And of course, I get it that you're not always going to know what's going on just because of one little thing. And I don't
yeah,
think anybody expects that. But at the same time, I think that can give us reasons to take a step back, think about how we treat people, think about how our actions can affect other people, and just ultimately, it never hurts to be kind. It just never hurts to be kind. But yeah, you mentioned about the nature versus nurture when it comes to serial killers. So what is that, and how do you feel that fits into this whole discussion?
Well, I think what I came across is like I don't know why I've done that, but I've always paid attention or like watched a lot of serial killer documentaries and different stories on many different ones, not even just like sort of what people would say is like the mainstream serial killers, Dahmer, Bundy, Gacy, things like that. I just noticed that one thing a lot of them have in common is they never start out that way. There's things that trigger them. There's things that happen in their youth that sort of, trigger why they go ahead and do what they do. And I feel like some people's mind, like some things that happen to them, whether it's at a young age and they become triggered later, is because like I think a part of their psyche gets fractured and they become violent, and sort of find a target, and that's why they lash out at women. Usually, serial killers are like, "Well, why do they always kill women?" It's actually because, like, in their youth, somewhere, something happened, and now they've been scarred by it, and that's why they go after women. Like, I don't think people really understand, like, that's what's happened with a lot of these people, whether they were assaulted, humiliated by a grandmother, an aunt, their own mother, just women at school in general. You look at the history of that, though, is actually that's something that happens with a lot of them is trauma when they're young, and you just wonder what actually would have happened if they did grow up in a normal family setting.
Mm.
So I
Do
think
you think there's a correlation or a connection between a person who becomes a serial killer and a person who shoots up a school?
I definitely think trauma of some sort happens. Not everybody's going to react that way. I think their mind is one way, and that's why you're sort of careful. You should always be careful with a younger person, whether it's like 4 to 12 years old, because I think like we don't know how things might fracture their psyche, and then all of a sudden they just stop caring. I think there's a similarity. Not everybody's going to react that way. Some people might commit suicide instead. They
Mm.
might, carry all these demons with them, and like they were assaulted as a child, and later on they commit suicide. Or, but I think some people they continue on with life and then develop a resentment towards individuals, whether it's being bullied at school and being like, oh, I'm tired of this. I'm gonna shoot up a school, or were abused as a child by a parent and then sort of carry that on younger, and then something triggers them when they're a bit older, and they just lash out then, and they sort of develop a lack of remorse because they've held it all in. There's I've definitely noticed there's a type of ones that do that, that hold it all in, and then something triggers them.
So, what do you think happened with Jeffrey Dahmer then? Because seemingly he had a relatively normal childhood. I mean, there was the whole thing about his parents bickering a lot, but it seems that he himself wasn't mistreated of any kind in any way. So apart from that, which I imagine can still, going to be upsetting, but it's at least to my amateur mind, seeing your parents argue isn't on the same. I hesitate to say level, because I'm not sure that's the right word to
Yeah,
use, but it doesn't seem like the same type of trauma as being beaten. But you know what I mean?
yeah.
Or do you feel like it just doesn't matter? Trauma is trauma.
I think, like I was saying about how it depends on the level of the individual's mind. You and I could probably sit there and be like, "Oh, that doesn't bother us," but maybe something like that in his mind, they thought they were arguing about him, and it gave him a sense of being, "Oh, I shouldn't have been born because they're arguing over me," or something like that. Maybe he got a feeling of worthlessness as it was about him, and he needed to leave that. He didn't like the energy that was coming off. Maybe that negative energy affected him as a young person, and he just wanted to run away. That's what I mean by like it, we're all going to have different minds, and some people are going to be stronger when they're younger. Some people are going to be weaker when they're younger, and sometimes you just got to be careful with around what that might happen with them. So maybe that's what happened to Dahmer. Maybe he wanted to run away from the negative energy that was in the household, and maybe they thought it was about him, and he needed to get away from it all and totally. And he took that negative energy and clearly put it into like killing animals and playing around with animals,
Mm.
and it sort of probably just progressed into more.
So with the nature versus nurture, one of the sort of thoughts I have on that is that I mean, there's that discussion's been around for years about whether we're born with certain traits or whether everything we are is just down to our environments and how we're raised and so on and so forth. But one of the
Yeah,
thoughts I've kind of had is that it's kind of a little bit of both. So let me know what
yeah,
you think of this. I kind of feel like we are all born with a particular trait. We're not all born with the same traits. However, during our lives, we don't necessarily experience or come across the thing that we're born with can excel in. So, for example, you might, I'm sure you heard of like these kids who are like, 3 years old, they played piano for 2, 3 months and are already playing at grandmaster level, the type of
yeah,
level that any other person would take years to get to, right? And they're already playing at that kind of level. I feel like somebody like that is born with a particular trait. That means that when they set the piano, it all just clicks.
yeah,
But not everybody is born with that same trait. So not everybody's going to set the piano and it's just going to click. Somebody else might be born with a particular trait where they can do maths at a ridiculously high level. So when they take a maths class, everything just clicks and they understand it in a way that nobody else does. But then if you're born with that, say, trait of, for example, the piano, but you never sit at a piano, you're never going to know that is what you want. You're just going to keep doing things that maybe you're not so good at. So I feel
yeah,
like we all born with something, not necessarily that, or it could be anything. Maybe you're good at the spoons, whatever. But
yeah,
you were all born with something. We
yeah,
just don't always experience that thing that we're born with.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
I agree with that. I've actually had that conversation saying like to people about like just keep trying to find things and maybe you'll come across the one that clicks for you. Like I never thought I could write a comic or a graphic novel, and then I just sat down and it all started generating. So I definitely agree with yeah that we definitely have the ability to do those things, and that's a good reason. That sort of makes sense why serial killers might be born with a bit of that trait, a bit of that ability to not feel emotion when they kill something that's alive. I think is
Mm,
definitely in there. I think that's actually sort of something that's actually you sort of hit on it that we're born with it. I think all men are born with sort of a trait to be able to hunt. So
mm,
now that men don't necessarily have to hunt like we did for thousands of years, hunt for your food and kill an animal to eat, right? Like, and things like that. I think like that's actually a trait that we still have, and maybe, these individuals still have that in them more than others.
mm,
We don't have to hunt for our food anymore, really, and a lot of people can't kill a spider or a mosquito, right? But maybe these ones still have it in overdrive
mm.
and are used to having to hunt animals or hunt or fight in a war, right? Like we were born with that genetics to be able to do those things for thousands of years. As much as people might be like, that's ridiculous. I'm like, when you think about it, we had to fight off other people.
Yeah.
We had to defend our families, our land. We had to fight for kings and queens. For thousands of years, we had to hunt animals and kill them and cut them up to eat them or we die, right? It was self-preservation.
That's interesting because I remember somebody told me this about cats. Cats are naturally natural hunters. So when they become domesticated, they still maintain that natural instinct to want to go out and hunt. But because they're
Yeah,
domesticated, they're being fed and they eat food and relax around. They still feel to go out. So often, if you have a cat, you might find that your cat goes out and brings back a dead mouse, doesn't eat it, right? But it just feels that it still
exactly.
needs to go out and kill a mouse or whatever, or
Yeah,
bird or whatever, because they still maintain that natural instinct to do it, even though they don't necessarily need to feed themselves because they're being fed at home, but they
yeah,
still feel to go out, bring back kill a mouse and bring it back and present it to you or something. And
yeah, exactly. That's why I feel like is why when people argue with me about war, I'm like, war will always exist because we'll always have that instinct to sort of for self-preservation, to want more,
mm,
to take over more for whatever reason it is. It's just going to be in human nature to be like, oh, your family has more, well, I want to have more. And I think like that's sort of a trait that we'll always have, and why like it's not necessarily based going to be based on conflict. It's just going to be based on greed and
mm,
people wanting more. And I think that's why war will always exist. Is they're just going to be compelled to, be that way. Like you said about the cats, it's just going to be there. Like I don't know why I want war. We've got to go out and do it. And you're like, okay,
yeah. I mean, that kind of thing I like. I guess there's a lot to be said about our egos and how we don't always keep our egos in check.
yeah,
When something upsets us, and I think when it comes to men, we often don't get very many chances to express ourselves in healthy ways. Um,
yeah,
we often get told things like to man up and to walk it off, or things along those lines, right? So we don't get and I'm generalizing here, of course. I'm sure there's
yeah,
plenty of dudes out there that do get to express themselves in healthy ways, and that's great. But a lot of us don't.
yeah,
And by the time we get to our adult years, even though we might be of the mindset of trying to do better and trying to express ourselves more and this, that, and the other, a lot of those traits stay with us, and when things slight us, sometimes our first thought is to whether it's to fight back or to take, or in the case you said about wanting more, when you see somebody who has something that you don't have and you feel like I want that, even though you don't really want it,
yeah,
you just kind of like, just the fact that they have something that you don't have makes you feel some kind of way, and you
yeah,
can't always explain why you even feel that way, because it's like you don't really want that thing, you
yeah,
know. But yeah, I do think there's a lot to be said about learning to keep our egos in check and learning to not. I mean, it's all easier said than done, I know, but
yeah.
learning to not desire things that you don't, where you don't want. Also, understand that if you're feeling any kind of way about something, it's not about what that person is doing or what that person has, and more about maybe things missing within your own life that you need to address. You know.
Yeah, I feel like about it's about being humble and modest. Like
Mm,
appreciate the little things that you have. And that's what I do. I don't really go out and want a bunch of stuff that everybody else has. I found what I like, and then that's why I collect. My collection of CDs and comics. Like
mm,
I don't want everything that everybody else has. Even I don't want a big house or fancy clothes or cars and things like that.
mm,
It's just, yeah, like you said, keep the ego in check and just. But that's also probably the media and social media and
mm,
all the things out there that everybody else has is generating the desire for more. People think that that gives themselves self worth if they have a fancy car or something like that and a bunch of money,
mm.
and that might complete them. But it's probably more about trying to find what you really want in life
Yeah,
and not what everybody else in the world has.
yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think for myself though, and perhaps other people of say similar age who've grew up in sort of similar ways, where you kind of grown up, you kind of grow up, brought up to see things like having money, having
Yeah,
status, power, all those sorts of things, as what success is.
yeah,
And a lot of times, you're being compared to other people. Oh, your cousin has that, or this person has that. Your friend's doing this, and that sort of thing. And it's kind of one of these things where I don't believe it's done to depress you. But I
yeah,
think when you go back to say our parents and our grandparents and how they were raised and what they went through, is also kind of coming through as them trying to do the best they can, but it comes out in a way that ultimately pits you against other people.
yeah,
And even though now I could be like, that's not me, I can say I'm not chasing all these things. I can say that, but you do meet people from time to time who have these cool things, and there is that still thing that comes up where you're like, oh, that's cool that they have it, man, I wish I had that. Then I have to kind of check myself and be like, actually no, I don't. I just it's just part of how you kind of brought up to almost envy what other people have as a way of, this is what success is, and the truth is success is what you make it. But
Yeah.
that doesn't sound as cool. You know what I mean? That doesn't sound as cool at the family functions. Oh yeah, my son, he just makes videos online. Like, that doesn't sound as cool. You know what I
Well,
mean?
that sort of
It's
comes back versus the nature versus nurture thing, right? Like if you're nurtured into believing that you need to be competing with your cousin or your brother or your friends because of their success, all of a sudden that's probably something that's ingrained in you, thinking you need to go do these things, and then that's what success is. I wasn't like that. So I grew up just appreciating a whole kinds of little things, and could be why I'm like the way I am now. I appreciate a lot of those things. I see success as just, it can be a small business, it could be somebody who's released, an album or a book, and little things. I don't really look at it as, oh, success has to be, as a musician, I have to be the size of Metallica or Slipknot to be successful, things like that. So I think that could also be a bit of nature versus nurture as well.
no, for sure, for sure, and it's yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of, at least myself anyway, a lot of, say, unlearning, and just
Yeah.
realizing that. I mean, I was thinking like this the other day actually, and perhaps this kind of fits into what we're talking about, the idea of chasing things. We talk about, chasing money, chasing women, chasing success, or chasing things like that.
Yeah.
And it kind of occurred to me a little while back that if you're chasing something, that means it's moving away from you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, imagine like a police chasing a crook. The crook doesn't want to get caught. You know what I mean? That's why he's moving away from you. He's running away from you. You're
Yeah.
chasing something that is constantly moving away. Why do that? Why live your life in constant pursuit of something that doesn't want you? You know what I mean? Why not? I think in my mind, tries to create a life where the things that are good can find their way to you. And the
Yeah.
things that are good
Exactly.
might not be the things that you've been told to go after. It could be something completely different. It could be something that you've never even thought of. But if you're not allowing that to come to you and you're just chasing these things that are moving away from you, then it just feels to me like you're just in this pursuit of constantly trying to get to something that is never there when you get there.
That's sort of how I look at happiness.
Right,
Everyone's
yeah.
always like, I want to find my happiness. And it's like, well, how do you know when you actually got there? Or is there another level beyond that?
Mm,
Like, you're in the pursuit of happiness. Well, if everything's perfect, are you happy yet?
yeah.
Like, is there another level of happiness? Like, and I think that's why people sort of, might move on from a relationship. They think it's perfect, but then they find one flaw and they try to move on to something else.
Mm,
Like, is that why relationships are failing so much? Because the person doesn't seem as perfect as they once thought. So they're always like, well, I can always upgrade. I can always meet somebody who's more attractive or makes more money. And so they keep searching for more. And it's like, well, then you're always going to be chasing, that person that you're looking for. I think that's detrimental to all these relationships. They're always looking for more, and things, instead of just, being content with, like you said, letting the stuff that come to them, and fit into their sort of cogs of their machinery, being like, no, I like doing this. I have all these aspects in life, and I like doing all these things, and this is where I'm at. I'm not chasing anything anymore. And I think that's sort of what the world wants us to do, is keep chasing, because I think the more you keep chasing, the more, you spend money, and
yeah.
the more you don't pay attention to the real things that matter in the world, and they just, definitely don't want us paying attention to that.
No, for sure. And like, just what you said about relationships. I just feel like there's definitely something to be said about how a lot of these sort of, dating apps and things like that create this illusion of choice. You
Yeah,
know, so you might go there and think like you've got all this choice, and well, maybe some people actually do. To be fair, right? Some people actually do have it like that. To be fair, But the average person, it creates this impression of having all this choice when the reality is you probably don't. Your choices may be like this, even that much. But
Yeah.
like you say, you might meet somebody and it's like, oh, but there's another person who has this other thing that I like. Oh, this person might have this thing, and that's person that thing. So it's like chasing this idea of perfection
Yeah.
that maybe it exists, but would you ever get there? And what's the reality of me as somebody who literally ticks every single box that you ever had on absolutely everything throughout the entire duration of your, you know what I mean? It creates this unrealistic, or I don't know if that's the right word to use, but certainly improbable idea of a unicorn of a
Yeah.
person. That
Exactly.
person probably might exist somewhere, but they're probably already taken. Maybe they already got a boyfriend, girlfriend, they're married already. Maybe they died a long time ago. You know what I mean? That you're searching for this thing that is so rare, but
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot to be said about how these things create this idea that you can get that, and yeah, most people won't.
Yeah. And I think it creates that idea, like you said, and then people start nitpicking and ruining relationships that are already really good.
Mm,
I think that's why those relationships become sabotaged because, like you said, is it creates this idea that you can find this perfect person because you have all these options, and then they're looking at it all the time, and then you self sabotage a relationship that's perfectly fine. Because I've been a part of that,
mm.
trying to nitpick and find little things wrong with me, and
Yeah,
I've seen
you and me
that.
both, brother.
Yeah, I've seen that in other people's relationships being like, this was perfectly fine. Why did they want something else? And they're like, well, it's just because they think they have the world sort of gives them this piece, this item that says, no, you can probably find more. And it's like, why? Maybe the world is trying to generate, make us miserable,
Yeah, indeed.
because a lot of things that we do when we're miserable is we spend things or spend money on things and want to consume stuff, and that's why I think like news is definitely something out there that makes us miserable. I've definitely seen people and makes them want to drink more. Oh, the world sucks, I gotta open a beer. I'm like,
Yeah, these to take the edge off. Yeah,
but
but
yeah,
yeah, I think like I
definitely.
said before, if we're consuming, if we're not thinking and we're not seeing what's going on, it just becomes this cycle, you know, of spend and repeat, spend and repeat.
Yeah, whether it's eating or drinking or buying things or buying clothes to look better or whatever it is, people just, oh, this will make me happy or this will take me out of this mood, sort
Mm.
of thing. And I don't know if it could be why the world wants us to be miserable, but it sounds like a good trick.
Well, could be working. But yeah, and I do feel like, I mean, there's a phrase I heard a while back. I can't remember where I heard it though, but it was something on the lines of if you can't be happy with nothing, you can't be happy with anything. And I do believe that there's truth to that. Like finding happy. Well, it's not so much about finding happiness,
Yeah,
but more understanding that it's already within you, and it's really just letting it out, and allowing yourself to just be, allowing yourself to do the things that you actually enjoy doing and not what you think the world wants you to do because you have to be this thing that everybody else sees as a success or everybody else sees as what a man should be or everybody
yeah,
else, let me allow yourself to just kind of be, and then balancing that out with how you believe, your your life and your morals and your values and all that sort of thing, and how it kind of fits in together, but I think from again amateur here, but I feel like it starts with just that self or that self realization of just allow yourself to be and being honest with yourself about what is it you like, you don't like, and how you try to proceed from there.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing I say all the time is people pretty much most people I've ever met are afraid to be honest with themselves.
Mm,
They can't admit to be honest with their whether their faults or weaknesses, whatever it is. Um, they can't seem to do that, and I think that sort of hinders themselves. But I was thinking about what you said, like finding just that enjoyment. And I was thinking, like outside right now is really sunny, so to enjoy yourself, you could go outside for a walk down by the river that's near here, and that's free. You don't have to spend money to enjoy that,
mm,
right? Like, and those I think the things that are being taken away or we're being taught to perceive, is buy things, watch things on TV, go to movies. Those all that type of stuff is supposed to make you happy, whereas something like that is totally free. I could walk down to the river and then just enjoy the sounds of the river on this sunny, cool day. And then that can be much more enjoyable than going to a movie or something like that. And that's totally free.
well, I mean, I don't know about more enjoyable.
Well, for me,
I might be still stuck in the matrix on that particular point.
for me,
But no, yeah,
like,
no, I know, I
yeah,
think I know what you mean. But just the idea of you don't necessarily have to spend money to just do something nice.
yeah,
You can just go out for a walk or whatever, and you know just take certain things as what's the word I'm looking for, as yeah, as they're available, because, well, for one thing, not everybody gets to enjoy walks by the beach in the sun, right? So just the idea that you can do that and appreciate that as this beauty of nature, and yeah.
yeah, it definitely makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that might be a good place to wrap up and wind down. But
Yeah.
before we do, Mr. Andrew Sennedra, do you have any final words or anything you like to add before, or any last things to mention?
Oh, we covered a lot of different things today, which is
Indeed.
pretty good. I usually never really get to. This is all usually conversations I can only have with a couple of people. So having it out there on YouTube is kind of interesting to see what comes of it. So yeah, usually um, if people want to check out my channels and stuff like that, if they want to find out about my thoughts on music and things like that, those are always good. I don't. I even though I just talk about metal, I'm open to trying to dissect all kinds of other music as well. So
Yeah, I've definitely put some links in the description for you guys to check out. Um, music channel, comics, and the wrestling channel. Let me see if I got this right. Gwill Fight Wrestling Hub.
well fight Wrestle Hut.
Gwell
Yeah,
Fight. Okay. Gwell Fight. Gwell Fight. Okay.
yeah. I live in a city called Guelph. It's a weird name.
Okay. um. All right. Well, now I know. It's named after the city. All right. Well, Mr. Andrew Sennedra, big up for coming through. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and chat with me. We talked about wrestling, comics, music, serial killers. So you're definitely a big range today. So yeah, appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, we're cool.
And guys, yeah, check out the links in the description. But for now, till whenever, if ever, peace.